Relations, and you can switch that on.
All right, welcome back. We're here with David Hall. We're going to start work on, we're going to get a walkthrough of H111, which is entitled An Act Relating to Workforce Housing. David was one of the two attorneys on this bill, along with Ellen Sikowski. Tchaikovsky.
Just like it's spelled.
I will get it right someday. Tchaikovsky. My experience, never mind. And David will be, so H111 had kind of two distinct flavors. One was, as David was pointing out just before we went on the air, and one was regulation, was more housing oriented directly. So with David, when you're ready to go, we have until we go on the floor. So if we can get through most of this, that would be special. I've asked the committee to sort of limit their questions right now to only if they can't help themselves, but to try to get through.
All right. David Hall, Legislative Counsel, trying to pull up the draft from your webpage and share to the screen. Is that what you desire, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Show it behind me. All right.
That way I don't have to, at least I don't have to open up that.
Okay. So this is H111, an act relating to workforce housing. I don't remember the point at which we ended up with that title, but here we are. It's giving me a countdown to start the broadcast.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like Wayne's World.
Just like it.
It's probably early in the session to be punchy, but I'm already there. So let's see. My sections in this one are the first few. Okay, the first one is what is commonly referred to as VHIP. We tend to ignore the R in there. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's
because VHIP is just not as poetic.
I like VRIP. That's pretty fun. At this point, this program is codified. You may remember that this started life as a proposal that didn't quite cross the finish line a couple of times in the early years. And then when the pandemic hit and housing money and recovery money was available to try to prevent public health problems from people getting evicted, part of the solution was to adopt what was then VHIP in one of the CARES Act bills. And then that got some money in a first round and then another round. And then eventually this made its way from sort of a pilot program, emergency program, to a codified, essentially permanent program. This does appear in Title 10, Section 699. And, I don't know how much everybody remembers or if you're at all familiar with this, but basically originally the thrust of this program was to make targeted investments in properties that were not online, essentially, for reasons usually related to not being code compliant. And the idea being that, with a targeted investment from the state, a matching investment, we could bring online some of these older or decrepit or blighted vacant buildings that did not meet code, were not occupied, and could quickly increase the number of housing units available. Last year, or maybe the year before, I can't remember, but the last biennium, the program was expanded to allow for the creation of new accessory dwelling units. And so that is a particular type of accessory unit that has a meaning in statute we don't need to dig into too much right now, but know that it's sort of a secondary unit to what's already a primary residence. It has a lower number of square feet, a smaller profile. It's clearly subordinate to the existing unit, But it would, to allow things like a mother-in-law apartment, a garage apartment, those types of things that could also, for relatively less money, bring another unit online.
Once upon a time, they had to be appurtenant, which would be connected to the house, right? Now, the language we passed last year so that an ADU can be separated from the house. It just has to be on an owner occupied.
Right. It could be, part of a freestanding building. That whole concept of being subordinate to is still there. It still has to be smaller in size. And I note it because it's a discrete kind of new unit. The version of this that just passed out this morning in the Senate goes a few steps further and starts talking about the creation of other new kinds of units. So I guess to frame this for you, the discussion now for this program is, as it evolves, what kinds of units should be allowed, is the target population for tenants that are eligible to be rented to through, units created in the program, et cetera. Did I see a question over here?
I do have a quick question.
Yeah.
In the current statute, is there a limit to how many per parcel? How many ADUs per?
That's a good question. I don't actually, Ellen might know. It looks like she's raising her hand. David?
Ellen Jankowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. So it's in the zoning chapter, which, so the definition does require that towns cannot prohibit one accessory dwelling unit. They can prohibit more than one, but every town has to allow at least one dwelling unit per ADU per dwelling unit.
So in a town where there is a limit on the number of acres, the amount of acreage, say in our town we don't have, it's disallowed for any parcel to be less than 10 acres. Does that apply to the number of dwellings? I mean, you're not allowed to have more than one house on a 10-acre parcel. Does that apply also to ADUs?
Yes. So an ADU has to be associated with a single family dwelling.
Okay,
And
Just
so
one.
one per.
okay.
Some towns have expanded that to allow more than one, but primarily one ADU per single family.
Thank you.
Since we're talking about it, I think it's okay if we just quickly look at it. So this is the subdivision E that's referenced in the VHIP statute. So as Ellen said, it's a weird construct because this is permissive about what kind of bylaws you can have, but then it also says what towns can't do within the bylaw structure. So no bylaw can have the effect of excluding as a permitted use one ADU that's located within or appurtenant to a single family dwelling on an owner occupied lot. You can subject it to the same sort of review and dimensional requirements. An accessory dwelling unit means a distinct unit that clearly subordinate to a single family dwelling and has facilities and provisions for independent living, including sleeping, food prep, sanitation, provided that it has its own wastewater sufficient capacity. It's not 30% of the total habitable floor area of the single family dwelling or 900 square feet. So there you go. That's what we mean in this context when we say accessory dwelling unit. So you'll see on page 4 here, we're talking about in subsection B under VHIP again, the eligible rental housing units. And we have again, a non-code compliant unit. So that means it doesn't meet applicable building, housing, or health laws. And the unit has been unoccupied for not less than 90 days prior to the date of application, or the landlord agrees to anti-displacement measures developed by the department. Right now, the way that this program is being administered, there is this requirement that, and I don't know if it's across the state or it's just some of the partner organizations, but they have brought forward this requirement about occupancy, which is actually not in the statute. It used to be part of the statute. I don't know if you remember this from one of the earlier iterations, but it's not anymore. So I've been a little bit confused in the beginning about whether or not, this needs to be here. It's a policy choice for you, but I know from testimony that the department's position is they don't want a requirement or a limitation that this apply only to unoccupied units. They want to be able to renovate occupied units that are nonetheless not code compliance. And they want to have some sort of measure, they call it anti-displacement measure, to be sure that you don't, kick somebody out or upgrade this unit and then jack up the rent and the people lose their housing just because it's been renovated. So I flagged that for you here. Question about, how do you want this program to apply?
That was definitely in like S-79 or even prior to S-79, which is 2019.
So 2 here, the new accessory dwelling unit, already in current law that you can make the ADU. New language says the unit may be created within an existing structure or maybe a new or part of a new structure built on the existing parcel. And then 3 authorizes a new dwelling unit. And this is a unit will be newly created, and it can be created within an existing structure or part of a new structure built on an existing parcel. So to me, this verbiage is confusing. And I know that's funny coming from the person who worked on the language, but if you've written your own bills by now, you know that sometimes that process doesn't end you in a final place. I think that the concept and the policy choices that are being raised here are more important than the words. And that is, should VHIP take that next step and be allowed for the creation of new units that aren't necessarily ADUs? And if it is allowed, what is the limitation there? What should it be? Should it be new units within an existing structure? Should it be new units in a new structure? If so, how many units? And is this moving to a place now where we're starting to duplicate efforts with other types of programs? I think that's sort of the policy spectrum of options there.
Right, go ahead.
Can you give an example? I'm not picturing what would be this new different type of
Right.
ADU.
Yeah, so let me make one more point and then answer your question. I think authorizing ADUs now, if you're gonna allow additional new units, is superfluous, because an ADU is really just a type of a new unit, right? It's a constrained type. It has to be 900 square feet or 30% of the footprint, right? It has to be subordinate to an existing unit. So under current law, we've allowed this certain type of new unit to be created. You've got a big Victorian here in Montpelier, you put in an ADU above the garage. It's smaller, it's subordinate, it's a separate unit, but it's a discrete type that meets the language in current law. This language, this concept of new dwelling units means you could take, a 3,000 square foot house and chop it into 2 or 4 or 6 units, depending on how you guys want to limit it. You could build a new building on the lot and put 1 or more units in it, if that's allowed under current zoning. Theoretically, you could subdivide a lot or a double lot and put, a whole new building there. So it just depends on what kind of parameters you want to put around it. But the effect is expanding the program to allow for the creation of new residential housing units.
Just expanding that definition of ADU to include XYZ. No,
It's expanding the use of the money
I see.
of the program.
I see.
Think of it like this: existing units, new units.
Yes.
ADU is a kind of a new unit. Right now, ADU is the only kind of new unit we allow. This would expand the universe to allow theoretically any kind of new unit.
So that's a change from the way that it was originally intended, which was to take lesser apartments and make them habitable, or make them code, to pass the codes, whether it's electric or plumbing or what have you. This is asking basically this is actually kind of similar to the missing middle housing piece of, in the sense that it's kind of like somebody, a developer might be asking for essentially to be subsidized X amount of dollars if they qualify to build new, or to subsidize their building a new building. Nothing costs only $50,000.
Right.
Representative Parsons.
Just quick, just so I'm clear here. Basically, what you're saying is if you're gonna have this new dwelling unit section, like there's no point even having ADU as part of this whole thing. Just scrap it because it fits under that.
Right. If I were writing it from scratch, I would say we no longer need to call out ADUs because we're allowing any new unit.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep, exactly. So
What page are we on now, 5?
I'm moving down to 5, subsection C regarding administration of the program. And the new language here in subdivision 2 is authorizing a housing organization to use a portion of the funding for reasonable administrative expenses as determined by the department. There was some discussion this morning about whether there should be a number on that. Ultimately, they opted not to have a number, and then they opted not to include any language about administrative expenses because it's sort of already part of the program flow. But I don't see any harm to calling it out this way and saying clearly that they are allowed to do that.
They're not receiving the grants or loans, they're expected to administer the program.
They're administering the grants and the loans, so they're putting work in.
And again, just to have a step back, housing organization, they're the ones that receive the funds from the department in order to maintain and administer the existing program. So this isn't going through, if you have an apartment that needs to come back online and you want to apply for this program, you're applying through your local usually nonprofit housing organization.
Right.
There's 5 of them, I think, that are in charge of administering these funds.
Right.
Representative Labonte.
I might have missed something here, but what's the difference between a grant and a loan?
There are significant differences, and we'll take a look at them.
Oh, later, okay, thank you.
Yep. So under the program requirements in subsection D, there's no change in 1. I want to note just again this from the administrative side versus what the statute says. The statute caps the per unit investment at $50,000, but it also says that the housing organizations are supposed to consider the number of bedrooms in the unit. And so in implementation, 2 bedrooms or fewer, I believe, is currently capped at $30,000, and then 3 bedrooms or more gets the full up to $50,000. That's not part of the law, but that's part of the implementation.
Sorry, David, so is that, as part of implementation, is that written as a policy or is that just what they do, practice?
Yeah, it's a practice, and it's by a little bit by design. You'll see in lines 11 through 14. So in determining the amount of grant or loan, housing organization shall consider the number of bedrooms in the unit and whether the unit is being rehabilitated or newly created. So you guys contemplated that there could be lower amounts for fewer bedrooms, but you didn't, if my recollection is correct, you did not want to necessarily have to specify in statute what those levels should be. So they have this discretion to consider, new or rehabbed, how many bedrooms, and then set levels. And again, my understanding is it's 2 bedrooms or fewer is 30, 3 or more is,
That was my understanding. I just wondered if
Yep.
that was concrete anywhere.
It also takes into account the last year's language of creating an ADU rather than rehabilitating a
All right. So the new language on page 6, subdivision 7, 8, and 9, a landlord shall not offer a unit assisted through the program as a short-term rental. That is already specified under the ADU subsection below, but this would just make it across the board. It's a policy debate that has been held elsewhere of, does that mean forever? Or does that just mean during the duration of the program? The Senate's actually interpreted to mean the former. So that's something to consider.
forever.
Yep. Under subdivision 8, in a project with multiple new dwelling units, not more than 5 units are eligible for program funding. Under B, the department may adopt additional program parameters to ensure a wide distribution of units among developers in geographic areas. And 9, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, 8.
Yep.
Doesn't that effectively negate the whole, it's subsidiary to the principal dwelling unit on the,
Again, remember that the addition up here in 3 is to allow for the creation of new dwelling units that are not necessarily ADUs.
okay.
So if one goes, the other goes. Kind of, if we don't agree to that policy, or if we agree to that policy, then that language applies to those new buildings. All right,
9 says the department or the housing organization shall use amounts that are repaid or recaptured to provide additional grants or loans into the program. So, if you recaptured a grant or somebody fell out of the program, or once loans are repaid, they would revolve. 6 starts, and then moving into 7 really starts to talk about the population of renters. So E are the program requirements applicable to grants for new or non-code compliant units. So for those, you have a 5. So for the grant, as you asked, it's a 5-year compliance period. And obviously the difference between a grant and a loan is that the forgivable loan can be forgiven, but there are repayments. Grants are just grants. There's a shorter duration, but there's different substantive parameters, and those are on 7. So if we're talking about the 5-year grants here, a landlord has to coordinate with nonprofit housing partners, local coordinated entry organizations, or other similar organizations as determined by the department. So that's new, to identify qualifying households. And they want to define that here, a qualifying household, as one that is exiting homelessness or in need of resettlement and referred by a local coordinated entry organization, resettlement program, or other similar organization.
and I suppose the commissioner would have a definition of what another similar organization or program might be. We can ask him.
Sure. It's as they determine, so they'll know it when they see it.
Perfect.
So under 2 here, except as otherwise provided in B, a landlord shall lease the unit to a qualifying household, so exiting homelessness or in need of resettlement and referred. But B says, if the housing partner or organization determines that a qualifying household is not available, then the landlord shall lease the unit at or below applicable fair market rent, including utilities not covered by rent payments as established by HUD. So that's a little bit of a change under the existing law, which you see is stricken out. The existing law says to a household with an income equal to or less than 80% of AMI. And then if we don't have one of those, then to somebody else. Question?
Yes, so getting back to the grant, so if I get a grant of $30,000 and I got a 2-bedroom apartment, and so what you're saying is that I have to rent it at a certain price, which you just read off here, and after 5 years, then I could charge what I want. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Once the grant period is over, then it's becomes a market rate unit, if that's what you choose to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to scroll down to F. So this is requirements applicable to forgivable loans. So this is either new or non-code compliant. So the forgivable loan period is double that of the grant. It's 10 years. And that's the current law. It's unchanged. You'll see on the top of 9. You have to accept housing vouchers that are available. And you have to, yeah, and if there's no vouchers, then it still has to meet the FMR established by HUD, fair market rent. And then you get 10% forgiveness per year for each year that you're in compliance with the program. So the changes for G here, requirements for ADUs, it does specify that it's for a period of 5 years. Otherwise, it's unchanged. I would say that there's a gap here in the way, you know, this program was expanded to allow for new units and for the specifics of and the distinctions between the ADU versus the other types and grants and loans that are available. So the way that the Senate version resolves this, it just says it ties it to the type of investment vehicle you're using. So if you get a grant, all the same conditions apply. It doesn't matter what kind of unit it is. If you get a loan, same thing. And the grant is, you know, first priority for homelessness or resettlement, 5 years, vouchers, blah, 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 work with organizations. And on the loan side, it's 10 years at the fair market rent. So, you know, however you decide to move ahead with your policy on the House side, I think you need to, those are the things you need to think about. We've got existing, we've got ADUs, and then we've got all these other kinds of new units. What are the substantive requirements? Should they be different based on the unit or based on the type of investment vehicle, grant versus loan, right? Is everybody following me on that?
Mhm.
Okay. This last piece on page 10, the loan conversion. So a landlord may convert a grant to forgivable loan upon approval. I'm not sure that that's new language. It's underlined, but I'd have to double check that because we talked about conversion in this committee before. Yeah.
Representative person.
Page 8, it was all stricken out.
Okay. All right. So we just moved it down to a new subsection. Thank you, Representative Parsons. I appreciate that. That's very helpful. So although it's underlined here, it's just been relocated and that's why it looks like it's new language. Thank you. So this version of the program in section 2 has a $15 million appropriation from the general fund. I believe there was 20 million voted this morning in the Senate. Any questions on VHIP?
And when we talk about money, especially what was voted in the Senate bill, I mean, they still have to go to all through their process.
Yep.
So they're much like what we talked about with FMLI. That's their suggestion that has to go through their finance and appropriations committees before it reaches us as well.
Yeah, I just, you know, letting you know that stuff basically is FYI of what's happening in the building on similar subjects. But certainly long way to go through the whole process. So the next piece, we switch gears to missing middle income home ownership development pilot program. So this is an existing VHFA program. It, like the words say, it was designed as a pilot. When this bill was developed and introduced, the changes in this program are basically limited to the design and implementation and with an eye toward trying to achieve better economic and geographic distribution of the program benefits. So you'll see, for instance, on pages 12 and 13, consult with experts in the field, have outreach and education, make sure there's this equitable system for distributing monies based on community size, whether you've already received it, make sure that grants are targeted towards geographic or communities with pressing economic needs. So, it won't surprise you to see that this is really part of the sort of rural economic development, rural housing focus. I'll say that since this bill came out and what is passed in the Senate this morning, there's been some more changes, including a proposal to codify this, to not have it be pilot anymore, to put additional money into it. This version of this bill does have, in section 4, you'll see a $10 million general fund appropriation for the existing program. So I don't know if you have any questions about missing middle, or if I should continue my march on.
No, let's march on.
Okay.
You can, because we'll be talking about, not only, we'll be talking about this throughout the process as well as apparently we may be talking about it in reference to the BAA based on what's come out of the Senate so far.
Okay. So on page 15, section 5, this is a new VHFA program. And this is the Middle Income Rental Housing Revolving Loan Program. So if the missing middle income pilot program that we just talked about that you passed last year focuses on providing basically developer subsidies for affordable units for home ownership, this program is, as the name implies, is for the development of rental housing units. So basically, in a nutshell, this would be a VHFA program that provides, a favorable loan package, and VHFA is going to take that portion of the loan package that relates to affordable rental. So this is, imagine a project where there's going to be it's going to be mixed income, so there will be some market rate and some affordable housing. And the design of this program is to allow VHFA to finance the affordable portion of that project and, give attractive rates, buy downs. Maybe they can use no interest or deferred payment type structures, but there are obviously details here. So, and this is a revolving loan fund too. So as VHFA is paid back, it's intended to perpetuate for more affordable investments. So A, creates the program. B, relates to eligibility and criteria. So VHFA would, adopt and implement this program. You'll see in 2 at the bottom of page 15, to be eligible for a subsidized loan through this program, a project has to create 2 or more new rental housing units, which may include market rate and affordable units, provided that at least 25% of the units in the project are affordable to a household earning between 65 and 120% of the applicable AMI. Projects may include new construction, acquisition with substantial rehabilitation, and preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. So under 3, the VHFA portion is available only for the costs allocable to the affordable units. There is a cap in 4, and it is for VHFA's portion for its loan, it's the maximum is the lesser of 35% of the affordable housing cost, or there's caps on a per unit basis within certain income bands. So in this version, it's $125,000 per unit if it's affordable to a household with AMI between 65 and 80, or it's $100,000 per unit if it's affordable between 81 and 120 of AMI. Everybody understand that cap structure there? So under 5, VHFA determines the term and the interest rate. It can adopt mechanisms to provide enhanced subsidies. So that could be, like I said, lower interest rate, interest only with deferred payments or partial forgiveness. Under 6, this language is intended to leverage here. So the agency shall adopt program plan that allows for enhanced subsidy for a project that meets one of these sort of 5 buckets here. It gets 5 or more % of its funding from an employer, or under B, 5% from a municipal regional housing fund or other government housing investment. C, it utilizes tax exempt bond funding or low income housing tax credits. D, it's small in scale and provides infill development within a historic settlement pattern. Or E, it's in an underserved rural community that scores 50% or higher on the underserved communities index.
It
So,
doesn't really exist yet.
well,
It doesn't.
so a version of it does exist. You may have heard about it in the BAA in the context of the rural capacity assistance for, rural communities trying to leverage federal grants and providing assistance with them for grant seeking. So I think that, this subdivision E sort of gives you a timestamp of when this bill was developed and what was happening at the same time. It does relate to that index, in whatever form it exists right now. Under 7 here, this is, relates to affordability. So the agency should use one or more legal mechanisms to ensure that a subsidized unit remains affordable to a household earning the applicable percent of AMI for the longer of 7 years or full repayment of the loan. C says they can use some of the money for administration and that when they get repaid, it revolves. This bill in section 6 has a $15 million appropriation to VHFA. And a lot of this in these 2 sections in the Senate version is a little bit different than it is in this bill.
But I think one takeaway is that this language was the starting point for the Senate bill.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
It's not terribly different in the Senate version that passed. They expanded the AMI band to 150 at the max. It's 7 years plus a 3-year tail of affordability, a cap on the annual rent increases 3%. Blah blah blah. We can look into that when it comes, but they also appropriated $20 million for this one.
Well,
I think that might be it for my pieces, which means it's now the Ellen Show.
Alan Tchaikovsky, welcome back.
Are you going to zoom in and keep going, or would you just like to use this?
I did just sign in,
Oh, good.
but maybe it
Yeah.
would be easier if you just did it, but
Well,
I'll try.
my
Yours is dying.
little device is gonna die.
Okay.
Ellen, this is the first time you've been with us this year. Very quickly around the room, Tom Stevens, Waterbury.
Joe Parsons, Thompson, Groton, Newberry.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax, Georgia.
Dennis Labonte, Lindenville.
Elizabeth Burrows, Windsor 1.
Larry Labor, Essex, Orleans, District 1.
Mary Howard, Rutland District 6.
Robin Chestnut, Tangerman, Rutland Bennington District.
It is nice to meet many of you. Yes, I haven't met a lot of you before. I am Ellen Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky. You can picture it. Tchaikovsky.
Oh.
And
That's CZAJ equals chai.
yes, look at that. Yes. If you know the first 4 letters, that's the hard part. So yeah,
It's
Great.
the hard part, yes. I tend to ignore the C.
right. But yeah, the CZs,
Ignore the
Yeah.
J.
Are you an I or Y?
I. Yes.
So welcome.
Thank you. So I am with the Office of Legislative Counsel and I handle land use. So when it comes to housing, what that usually means is municipal zoning or Act 250. So I'm going to try to share my screen and pick up where we left off. So the second half of the bill is related to municipal zoning and Act 250 sections. There is some overlap, as David mentioned, with the Senate's housing bill that they passed this morning, and I'll point those out. But starting on page 18, did I do it? Is it working?
There you go.
Okay.
It took you a while. It took-
I'm not great with the iPad. That's not it. All right. Yes. Okay. So on page 18, starting with section 7. So the first section that I have drafted is related to the bylaw modernization grant program. So this is a statutory program where municipalities can apply for specific grants. And this is administered through the Department of Housing and Community Development. And these specific grants are for bylaw modernization. So that's for towns that have existing bylaws who are looking to update them. And there are a list of requirements that need to be met as part of that specific grant program. And so 2 changes are being proposed in this section 7. First, municipalities with communities that score 75% or higher on the Vermont Underserved Community Priority Index shall receive priority status in grant applications. And as you just mentioned, that underserved community priority index is a newer index, but it's giving priority to those with 75% or higher on the index. The next change is on page 19. And so again, part of this grant application process, to receive the grant, the municipality shall do a list of things. And number 4 on that list is review and modify street standards that implement the complete street principles in 19 VSA 309D and that are oriented to pedestrians, except municipalities with populations of less than 1,500 persons, which are exempt from this requirement. So it's exempting the smallest towns from the requirement to have complete streets in there as part of their update. Section 8 is then an appropriation. This is a $500,000 to the municipal planning grant program. And specifically, it says municipalities that do not yet have a municipal plan or do not yet have municipal zoning bylaws that apply for the grants shall be given priority. So the bylaw modernization grant is one type of grant in the municipal planning grant program. The other one is just a broad planning grant that towns who are any stage in the municipal zoning and planning process can apply for funding. And so this is granting $500,000 to that program and giving priority to those that don't yet have a plan or bylaws. Section 9 is another appropriation type section. It's directing of hiring of housing resource navigators. So the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies shall hire housing resource navigators, which shall serve underserved communities by working with municipalities, local housing organizations, and private developers to identify housing opportunities, match communities with funding resources, and provide project management support. So the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies is the umbrella agency for all of the regional planning commissions. So all 11 regional planning commissions are members to this organization. And there would be this new type of position within that organization called Housing Resource Navigators. And so at the top of page 20, there is appropriated the sum of $300,000 to VAPTA for the purpose of hiring housing resource navigators. So $300,000 is probably approximately 3 housing navigators, or however they're going to decide to structure that. Next, on page 20, section 10, there's a couple of sort of miscellaneous sections here. So first, section 10 is related to the state wastewater connection permit. So under existing law, projects located within a designated neighborhood development area, there's a cap on the application fee at $50. And so this amendment in section 10 is expanding that to downtowns and village centers as well. And so projects located within those centers will only need to pay $50 for the state wastewater connection permit. Section 11 is amending 24 VSA 4471. And so this is related to municipal zoning appeals. And part of this, I think, is a clarification of existing law. And so you can see that there's language that's struck and underlined, and it really is rearranging what is already in statute. So notwithstanding subdivision A determination by an appropriate municipal panel that a residential development will not result in an undue adverse effect on the character of the area affected shall not be subject to appeal if the proposed residential development seeking conditional use approval under subdivision 4414.3 is within a designated downtown, growth center, village center, or neighborhood development area. So that first sentence is existing law, and the elements of it have just been rearranged to read more clearly. And so what's happening here is an appropriate municipal panel which is either a development review board or a board of adjustment. It's the panel within the municipality that issues permit decisions for municipal land use permits. A decision by the panel related to a residential development, if they find that the residential development meets the character of the area, it shall not be subject to appeal if it's located within one of the designated areas. So this is slightly vague. And so a second sentence has been added on page 21 on line 6 that reads, other elements of the determination made by the appropriate municipal panel may be appealed. So this is saying that if the town has found that the residential development meets the character of the area, that decision cannot be appealed. However, other aspects of the project may be appealed. And this section is in the Senate's housing bill that was passed out of Senate Economic Development this morning. All right, section 12 has 2 Act 250 related provisions in it. So first, in order to trigger Act 250, something needs to either be a development or a subdivision, as those words are defined under Act 250. I'm happy to talk more about Act 250 if there are any newer members in the room that would like to hear more about it. But the very high level version of what we're saying here on page 21 is that the construction of improvements for a housing project within a designated downtown or village center with zoning is exempt from Act 250. So it's exempting housing from downtowns and village centers with zoning. Next, on page 22, there's a carve out from the definition of subdivision. So a subdivision means a tract or tract of land owned or controlled by a person that the person has partitioned or divided for the purpose of resale into 10 or more lots located within a downtown or designated village center. So the change here is that this is removing what's known as the 5-year 5-mile rule for subdivisions. Because in the rest of the statute that's not shown here, it's 10 or more lots subdivided within 5 miles within 5 years.
That's something we'll take more
Yes.
clarification on, yeah.
Next on, oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I just had a question about the prior section, construction improvements.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm reading it different than what you said or just discombobulating on this. It sounded as though you said this is removing for construction of housing projects. Or it's just the rehab of an existing one, correct?
No, this is, construction of a housing project is exempt from Act 250. So
I'm just reading it as the construction of improvements, not the construction and, sounds like you're rehabbing the place.
So yes, construction of improvements is a defined term under Act 250 also. So it technically is any construction. So it could be the rehabilitation of a building if the building is already standing and the building doesn't already have an Act 250 permit and it's becoming housing.
So we're gonna stop here
Yeah.
because our brains are hurting. Mine is. And so Joe, this is very reminiscent of what we dealt with S226 last year, where we got a bill that was half housing, half zoning. And
Where those little stars mean a lot.
Yeah.
And so chances are, depending on where this bill goes, I'm sure we'll be concentrating on the first 18 pages, and environment and energy will be dealing with this part of it. So, which isn't to say that we shouldn't know what's in it, but we need to get to the floor in a couple of minutes, and we're almost there, but
Yeah, and I think the last 3 sections I can sum up very shortly. like very quickly. So on page 22, section 13, section 13 is removing one of the appeal avenues of zoning appeals. And so currently under the statute, any 10 persons who live in that municipality can appeal a zoning permit, and that is being struck. Other people are still on the list of people who can appeal, but it's removing that one. Sections 14 and 15 are then language that I think your committee has seen. I have drafted many times. It's exempting the need for a state wastewater connection permit if the town has been delegated authority to issue the wastewater connection permit.
Some of us have seen it before.
Yes, it is. Yes, it has passed a few times. And then finally, section 16 is another Act 250 related section, and it is saying that alternative or community wastewater systems that will serve a designated area do not need to mitigate the conversion of primary agricultural soils.
What does that mean?
So under Act 250, if you're going to convert or destroy or negatively impair primary agricultural soils, you need to mitigate that impact either by conserving soils on the site or paying a mitigation fee. And so this is waiving the need for mitigation if it's for a alternative or wastewater community wastewater system.
That was the one I actually understood.
Because that's the one that you want or need in your town.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry we've just run out of steam, but
I know David took up all of that time,
I know.
but my sections are actually very complicated, even though they are short. So that is true.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for filling out the walkthrough. We'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, committee, we go live.